Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the second edition of our Invigoration web series. Today, we're going to be talking about de-escalation and conflict reduction. Not conflict management, but conflict reduction. We don't want to manage through conflict. We want to actually reduce it. There's a lot going on in the world, a lot going on for us personally, and professionally. Let's try and not add to the amount of conflict and strife that we have in our lives. If anyone here, if it's your first time using Crowdcast, there's a chat. I'm sure you found that. And if you have any questions, feel free to just click on Ask a Question, and then I will cover those at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we can go ahead and get started. Excellent. Excellent. So like I said, we're going to be talking about de-escalation and conflict reduction strategies, specifically in the workplace and for teams. Before we jump into the content, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and what Changing Perspectives is. So our mission at Changing Perspectives is to equip teams with the tools to activate their individual skills and perspectives so that the global work culture can be more transparent and respectful. So across companies, but even across the world, we want to make sure that transparency and respect are key cultural aspects of all companies. And we envision a world where work is a single invigorating ingredient of your life. It's not a slog. It's not something you just have to go through and just get home, just work-life balance, but actually something that adds value to your life. And so in the spirit of invigoration, this summer, Changing Perspectives is hosting a series of workshops, all online, because it is still a global pandemic. And this is our second one. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about communication across dynamic teams, and as things are changing, as you're working from home and remotely, getting used to all of those changes. Today, we're going to talk about de-escalation and conflict. And then coming up over the next few months, we will talk about common collaboration barriers, how to build more impactful information flows, what radical transparency really looks like and means in the workplace, and what the ROI is if you live into radical transparency and really activate all of the perspectives that exist across all your entire workforce, what that can look like and what that can deliver for your team. So we'll be doing this all summer. We hope that you join us again for some of the other sessions. I am Joanna Sides. I am the founder of Changing Perspectives, and I've been working on this curriculum for a few years now. I've worked in corporate America and European startups, so across kind of the whole gamut of work cultures, and I know that communication and collaboration is one of the problems that we see across any workplace, no matter where in the world you are, or what kind of company you work for. And it's really my passion to help reduce conflict, increase communication, and again, make work invigorating and joyful. So that's where you are. So let's get started. Again, not talking about conflict management, but actually how do we reduce conflict in the workplace? Well, in its most basic form, conflict is really just miscommunication, whether it's a misunderstanding or a lack of context. At its core, when there is conflict, you're seeing miscommunication. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. And before we talk about that, I want to just kind of lay this out for everyone. There is a 3 levels of behavior. There is a person, absolutely, and that's what we always jump to. We love to blame people for their behavior, but it's important to recognize too that people are reacting and interacting with the situation that they're in, and also even the broader system. And those 3 levels play a part in any time you see someone behaving or misbehaving, or when we are ourselves misbehaving. So yes, of course, our personality plays a role, but also the team dynamics that you're a part of. What project are you on at that moment? Who are you working with? In that meeting, or even meeting to meeting, your behavior can change. And then even beyond that, in the entire company culture, right? What's the culture of this company, or even the culture of business or startups? This is such a startup problem, or this is a big corporate problem. All of those layers kind of compound into what we see as this is what our behavior is, and kind of what we present. So it's important to think about all of those layers when we're talking about building context. And conflict is usually the result of one party, if it's a two-person conflict, or even if it's a team conflict, one party or another missing some of that context, missing what's happening in this situation, or what's happening in the broader system. And so almost always that's where conflict arises from. The basics of conflict, well, first, we humans, we are wired for collaboration. We want to work together, but we have our individual perspectives, and sometimes it's hard to see other people's perspectives, where they're coming from. And so that's where conflict happens, again, when we're missing some of that context on one of those three layers. And the problem is that once conflict occurs, that desire to collaborate can often dissolve. And in the best case, we disengage and we kind of just shut off. But in the worst case, we might seek revenge, or like to get even. And the tool that we often use to get even is shame. And shame is never a good motivator for collaboration. And I hope we can all agree that we want to work in workplaces that are more collaborative. If anyone doesn't agree with that, maybe we need to have a different conversation. But the basics of conflict are exactly that, that it's not where we are wired. We want to collaborate, but once there's any kind of misunderstanding, we slip very quickly into trying to get even and shame and blame other people. And when we get in that mindset, and we'll talk about how to disrupt that loop, but it's really important to think about, do I want to collaborate, or do I want to shame? Do I want to get even? And I think we can all agree we want to collaborate. That's what we want to do. Good. So the first thing is, let's talk about how talking is hard. There's a wonderful podcast by Esther Perel, who many of you may know from her relationship therapy. But she's just started a podcast recently called How's Work? And I had a great episode the other day where they were talking about it's important just to have a conversation about the fact that having conversations can be really difficult. And it's okay to say that, right? We have meetings before meetings to prepare for meetings. Why not have a conversation before we have a difficult conversation where there is a lot of conflict, or conflict has been building up, and just have a conversation and say, we're in this mess because talking is hard. And just recognizing that can go a long way. And again, recognizing that our behavior or our misbehavior is a result of systemic issues, situational issues, and of course, our personal issues. And it's important to recognize too that you don't leave your personal self at the door when you walk into work. All of the issues and things that you see in your personal life are of course also going to come out in work. And so it's important to not try and separate that, and embrace talking about how things are hard. So conflict builds up over time. And this is where we get something called emotional debt. And I just want to talk a little bit before we talk about how to disrupt conflict once it's happening. Where we often find ourselves is not in just one explosive conflict, but in something that has been building up over a long time. And so what does that look like? And if we let conflict build up over time, we develop emotional debt, which is very similar to any other kind of debt, right? Whether it's financial debt or technical debt, maybe you've heard of, if any of you are in the tech scene, when you've just done bug fixes on top of bug fixes. It's a series of kind of rushed business and technical decisions that have built up over time and caused your software to be slow. It's the same kind of thing. And again, in that How's Work podcast, Esther Perel calls it an emotional dowry. But I define emotional debt as the buildup of continuously unmet needs. So all of those annoyances or oversights, corporate terrorism, which is when you're kind of in that mode of like, I just have to get even, and you're using politics to sabotage other people. All of that is emotional debt. And again, it exists in every relationship, even work relationships. Some people that you know or some relationships that you've been a part of have maybe started paying it off. But if you have a lot of emotional debts, you can be sure that you're paying interest on that debt. And what that looks like is lack of productivity, burnout, frustration. You're kind of paying taxes and paying interest on that emotional debt. And so it's really important to try and dig your way out of that debt. I lovingly call this emotional debt sometimes a shit pile. So all these things build up over time and people start to say, oh, I can't be bothered. I'm just going to do the bare minimum. You're kind of getting unclear messages. There's lots of misunderstandings. All of these, just wasted time, all of this has built up over time and it's building up frustration. And you just kind of want to check out. Again, in the best case scenario, you want to check out. In the worst case, you're really sabotaging people. And that's what we want to avoid when we're at work. Obviously, we want to build more collaborative organizations. And what that does when you have that shit pile or that emotional debt, it causes a blockage of really critical information. The stuff that you need to get work done, to do your job, whether that's clear expectations, updates on projects, information, decisions that are being made, responsibilities and needs, all of that gets blocked up and can't be properly distributed because you're dealing with this friction and conflict that has just built up over time. And that can cause even bigger issues, even beyond the conflict. Then you're dealing with lost customers and lost sales and no productivity, and projects are failing and deadlines are getting missed. And so that's really the cost that you're paying for, again, letting that emotional debt build up. So where does conflict come from? It builds up over time, but where does it originate from? 9 times out of 10, it comes from uncertainty. Humans don't like to be uncertain. We want things to be certain and clear cut. And when we act poorly, it's often because we're nervous and we're uncertain. We're in an unfamiliar team or unfamiliar situation, and we don't know exactly what to do. And of course we feel unsteady. Of course you feel that way. And that's a totally valid feeling. But if we don't say anything and instead we try and overcompensate, conflict can often come up because we're missing context. We don't know exactly what we're talking about. And we open ourselves up to a lot of misunderstanding. And this is kind of the core reason that vulnerability is such a hot button topic in corporate America and corporate globally, just corporate in general, and in startups, because that feeling of we don't want to appear weak can often have a lot more damage than we originally think. It's okay to fake it till we make it. It actually isn't. It actually causes a lot of damage. In this case, we're talking about conflict and emotional debt, but also in just more mistakes than need to happen. And so it's really important, again, to talk about how talking is hard. And it's okay to say when we're unsure, and we can get to a place that we can be sure. That's what teams are for, putting our heads together, putting the most brains onto a problem. So you might be asking when you feel unsure, this is kind of a trigger moment. If you feel yourself asking, oh, I'm worried that I'm going to do the wrong thing, or I'm worried that I'm making the wrong choice, or what if this project fails? If you're starting to feel that, that's kind of a watch out sign to be, okay, well, I need to be careful about opening myself up for more conflict, and just recognize that uncertainty in yourself. Because again, you don't want to get defensive, but you also don't want to attack other people. And we'll talk about disrupting that attack defensiveness cycle in a few minutes. Good. So when we are uncertain, the temptation is to focus on the concrete. So every time we're uncertain, we just start to fixate on the things that we know, because that feels easier. It's much more comfortable, but it's oftentimes the things that are not concrete and not certain that actually really need our attention. And again, that makes us feel overwhelmed. And so we don't know where to start, and we prefer to kind of fixate on these insignificant details. And there's a word for this. It is called bike shedding. And this comes from an analogy where you have scientists that are all tasked with building a nuclear power plant. Well, building a nuclear power plant is a huge, complex issue. But what we know is that we're all going to be taking bikes to work. And so let's focus on really where are we going to build the bike shed first. That's concrete. Everyone feels comfortable having an opinion about where the bike shed should be. And so when we get caught in that, again, it's just to recognize if I'm fixating on really small, seemingly insignificant details, take a step back, take a deep breath, and realize, how do I make sure that I'm not ignoring huge problems down the line and contributing then again going forward onto that emotional debt. So don't focus on where to build the bike shed. Instead, really focus on how do we build that nuclear power plant, rather than, what are we going to name this Slack channel? Let's actually talk about the details of the user interface that we're building. People can spend weeks deciding on a project name. Project names are very near and dear to many people's hearts, but that is not going to help get the project done. Let's instead focus on the project scope. And those things can be really uncomfortable. And again, when we have uncomfortable situations, we feel uncertain and things aren't concrete, they're not absolutely sure, that is a trigger point for conflict. That's where conflict usually arises. So if you find yourself in these scenarios, we'll talk through a couple ways to break that cycle, and also to de-escalate once conflict has started to build up and you have some of that emotional debt. So what does conflict reduction look like? What can we actually do there? Well, the first thing is, again, fix what's actually broken, and not talking about the bike shed, but talking about that nuclear power plant. So if you find yourself fixating on insignificant details, or your team maybe is focusing on that, you're in the swirl of disagreements, nobody can seem to have a consensus. Reflect on why you're frozen in that mental loop, and reframe and refocus. We talk about that a lot in Changing Perspectives. Obviously, reframing is a core part of changing your perspective and seeing from other people's perspectives. So how do you do that? How can you trigger a reframe? Well, here's some really helpful questions to ask. Is how much does this impact the final product? So focusing not on the details, not what are we talking about right now, and all of these tiny little minutia, but really what's the impact on the final product, and just taking a step back. Do we need to invent something new, or can we use an existing model? Do we have to reinvent the wheel, right? Are we trying to fix something that's not broken? The bike shed is a perfect example. It doesn't really matter. The project here is building that nuclear power plant. Are we spending a lot of time fixing a problem that maybe doesn't need to get fixed? This is a question that I love. When you are in a swirl of disagreements or in conflict, a good question to ask, to kind of think about things in a new light, is what is this conversation distracting us from? We are making a trade-off, spending a lot of time talking about this one tiny detail, or we're talking about the project name for a really long time. what is that distracting us from? And that can, again, trigger everyone to start thinking about, okay, what is the long-term goal? And tapping into that innate human desire to collaborate, to work together. So that's a really good way of reframing a little bit. And then a really simple one, kind of, really, do we have to ask this, but do we need to resolve this? Are we going to lose sales because of it? Or whatever your KPI is, are we going to lose sales? Are we going to lose customers? If this issue is not resolved, is that going to have an impact on the bottom line? And again, helping everyone focus on the long term and what's the actual long-term goal here. Great. Here we go. Staying focused on what's important. This is another, I call it the I don't care matrix. Again, when we're uncertain and we're feeling a lot of conflict building up, maybe we haven't paid off our emotional debt, and so we're really easily triggered. We oftentimes really focus on things that aren't important, that we don't need to care about. If this is something important and you do care about it and you agree, fine. That's not what we're talking about. But when we don't agree, you have to really think about, is this important? And what I see so many times on teams is people start focusing on things that are not important, that they don't really care about, but they disagree and they have an opinion. And so you start to feel good, like, okay, I have an opinion, I can say something here. And we have to kind of catch ourselves and prevent conflict, reduce conflict before it even starts. Just say nothing. If you don't care about this thing and it's not really important, but you don't agree, really check yourself. And again, ask those questions even of yourself. What is this distracting from? Do we really need to have a conversation about this, or can I just keep my mouth shut? And it's fine that I don't agree because this isn't really important for the end goal. So what I tell people constantly is, do not spend any energy disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing. It's nice to have an opinion. It feels really good. We feel really, self-soothing, like, oh, I'm not uncertain about everything. I have an opinion about this. But you don't have to have an opinion about everything. And really, really, when you're thinking about reducing conflict on a team, make sure that you're spending your energy on things that are important and that you care about, not simply just because you have an opinion. That's really key. So the I don't care matrix. Christina, I'm glad you like that. Good. Win-lose mentality. This is another thing that I say often in Changing Perspectives. We have the technology. Technology is amazing. And so what we have to focus on is let humans do what humans are good at and let machines do what machines are good at. And one thing that machines are really great at is being binary. But humans don't have to be. And we kind of have this mentality already kind of set because this is the way we've always worked, which is never a good reason to do anything. We have this win-lose mentality. Lose it. Forget about it. Humans aren't binary. We can think about complex solutions to problems. And so when you're frustrated, you don't have to think about that trade-off of like, I'm right, they're wrong, or this person is stupid and malicious and I'm right. You don't have to think about that. You can reframe and think about alternate possibilities. That's what humans are good at. So let's lean in and be human. And again, we talk about this a lot. Shaming and blaming does not help decrease your shit pile. It just doesn't. It only adds to your emotional tax, and that is you're going to pay a cost on that. So be a good human. Don't be binary. Lean into your complex, nuanced mind and find win-win solutions. I say often, every story has 10 sides. It's not side A and side B. Every story has 10 sides, or maybe more, perhaps less, but it's usually about 10. And when you get a team into a room, everyone brings their own perspective and their own context. Again, they're bringing their personality, but they're also bringing their experience and the situation that they're in and the system and all of the education that they've had and all the experience of doing projects similar to this. They're bringing all of that with them. And so you want to make sure that you're tapping into every single area, every perspective that could be brought to the table, because that's where you'll get the most winningest solution. So how should we have healthy disagreements? Of course, there is going to be conflict, especially when we're looking at all of these different perspectives. We're trying to navigate all these 10 sides to these stories. Well, then how do we disagree in a healthy way? Because that's always going to happen. So how do we challenge well? I would encourage you to reframe here. And it's not about challenging. It's about enhancing your perspective. So don't think about, well, how do I disagree well and respectfully? Try not to disagree. Try to understand first. If you ever get into lawyer mode, it's like, I have to prove myself right here, or I have a point to make and everyone needs to listen to it. Stop and reframe and kind of start in a new place. Some helpful conversation starters, sentence starters to help you enhance your perspective. Ask someone, why did you choose that as a starting place? Oftentimes we roll our eyes and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe this person is doing it this way. They must be stupid. No one is stupid, really. No one that you work with is an idiot. They are bringing their own context. They're maybe in a different situation or a different system that you're in, and you want to understand why they're making those decisions. Maybe they are taking a path that you wouldn't take because they're trying to avoid obstacles that you hadn't noticed before. So ask them, what obstacles are you trying to avoid? What are the confounding parameters here? What is keeping you maybe in this box because I see it in a very different way? How do you define success? What does success look like for you? How did you come to that conclusion? What was your thought process there? Again, trying to enhance your perspective, always building up context instead of shaming and tearing them down. Don't add to that emotional debt. Tell me what you want to accomplish in the long term. That's a really great way of reducing conflict, especially when it's building up or you have a huge amount of emotional debt in this relationship and you both maybe are feeling a little bit triggered, is to focus on the long term. Look out into the future. What does success look like? What are you trying to accomplish? Let's talk about the long-term goals here. And that can really help simmer, everyone's spirits and have everyone calm down a little bit. Great. Explicit content. Explicit is key here. Every time you are communicating, even if it's just an email and documentation, I always tell all of my clients, be explicit and specific about everything. Explicit is always better than implicit. Don't make people read between the lines. This is especially important when you are dealing with conflict. If you are in a situation where things are tense or they have been tense for a really long time, it's really imperative that you be explicit about what you're saying. Tell it like it is. Be really specific about your expectations. And tell people what you need, not what you don't need. So especially when you're requesting someone to do a task or you're requesting information, rather than say, I need you not to do that, focus on what you do need people to do. It's much easier for a person, and it's much easier to be explicit also when you're talking about something that is rather than something that isn't. And again, you want to build context at every stage of communication, but especially when you are in a tense moment. Always be looking and seeking out, what am I missing? Looking and seeing what is the other person maybe missing that I see, and just constantly turning that over. When decisions are made, make sure that you're really laying out all of the perspectives on the table. What are all the benefits and all the costs that are involved in this decision? And even just laying them out really explicitly in writing somewhere really helps. All of that helps people see the full picture and helps everyone build context. Of course, you as the communicator, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're building your own context, but helping everyone else build theirs it is a great tool for reducing conflict. Motivation shift. This is a really tough one, and one I hear about clients a lot when they're dealing again with that large emotional debt, or they've had ongoing conflicts that have been going on for years. People can't even get on the phone together without screaming. Motivation doesn't come easily. You really shut down. And again, like I said, in the best case scenario, you're shut down. In the worst case scenario, you're actually sabotaging and doing a detriment to your team. But when you can interrupt these patterns and get people motivated, there's a lot of benefits. You start to build new feedback loops, which can build trust. And that, again, helps to pay off some of that emotional debt. When people feel heard, it's a lot easier for them to self-critique. If you just listen to someone else and say, where are you coming from? Tell me about your thought process. Then that gives them the safety and opportunity to say, you know what? The questions you're asking make a lot of sense. I hadn't actually considered, maybe I'm not thinking about this in the exact right way. So give people the benefit of the doubt, and again, build your own context to try and understand rather than attacking them first. And we'll talk about, again, how to disrupt this flow in a few minutes. When you build context and you ask questions, it's going to be much more difficult to fall into those old patterns of attack and defense, attack and defense. That one is a really hard one, especially when you're dealing with long-term conflict. Because you have so many patterns already built up, it's really, really, really important to constantly be asking these questions and reframing and starting from a new place. Because as soon as you just slip up just a little bit, break trust a little bit, make one mistake, it's so easy just to fall right back down into those old patterns. And so you want to be really intentional about building new feedback loops in your relationships. So how do we do that? How do we disrupt that defensiveness cycle? The first thing to understand, again, coming from your perspective, engaging with someone else's perspective, their perspective is their whole reality. And you have to kind of think about that. It probably isn't 100% right. I always say no one is 100% right. And also no one is 100% wrong either. So when you are engaging with someone, always try and remember that. But rather than fight head on, that causes people to be more defensive. So again, build context and ask questions. Because if you come at someone with, you're wrong, they're always going to come back with, nah. That's just our natural reaction, is to get defensive when someone attacks us. So the best way of diffusing and de-escalating conflict is always to ask questions first and try and understand. Look in and see, what is someone's perspective? What am I missing? What context am I missing? And help them also to see the context that they may be missing that you can bring to the table, because everything is a partnership. Every story has 10 sides. So rituals of repair. When you have some of this conflict already built up, and we're trying then to break the cycle, what does that actually look like? Again, we talked about talking is hard. Recognize that. And it's okay to say to someone, talking about this is hard. I feel really frustrated all the time. We have this emotional debt, use that word. We have a lot built up. You can even use shit pile if you feel comfortable. We have that built up, and talking about it is going to be hard, and recognizing that. Try switching roles for a day. You do my job, I'll do yours. Here's my KPIs. How would you do it? I often say, we like to look and point out other people and say, oh, I could do that so much better. If only I ruled the world. That is a greenfield fallacy. And I'm working on a project specifically about that greenfield fallacy with a friend, because we see that all the time, especially in companies when whole departments are in conflict. People will often say, but yeah, I would do it differently. you're probably missing some of the obstacles. Like, again, that question that we had before, what obstacles are you avoiding? That's an important one to look at, because the reality is you probably wouldn't be able to do it better if your roles were switched. And so that helps, again, build perspective. When you have kind of a good thing going and you're starting to break that cycle down, make up a catchphrase. You reached an agreement, this is good. If you're a Star Trek nerd like me, you might say, like, make it so. and that can be your catchphrase that, again, starts to help build those positive feedback loops rather than falling into old behavior where you're just attacking and getting on the defensive. A helpful tool of building your own context is to just argue the other side, or an alternative side, not necessarily the other side, because how many sides do stories have? Not just two. Actually argue that side and make an argument for an alternative side of a story. And that can help you kind of repair your bad cycle of just getting defensive. So try some of these out with your team. There's many, many, many ways to repair kind of damaging cycles in teams. These are a few that I like and that I've seen work, but try some out for yourself. And if you have more, please share them in the comments or in the questions. Words matter. They always matter. It's, again, we talk all the time at Changing Perspectives about being explicit and being specific, but especially when you're in conflict and emotions are high and tensions are high, words really matter. And the words that you choose to use can make all the difference. So I just want to talk a little bit about how to have productive conversations, especially when tensions are high. So we're just going to go through a few scripts of how can you reduce conflict, what scripts can you use to de-escalate and diffuse conflict. How many times have I said it already? Always add context and be explicit and specific as possible. So some sentence starters, again, that you can use is, from what I can tell, again, introducing your perspective. From what I can tell, this is my diagnosis. Playing someone's perspective back to them. It's a great tool. I'm hearing that this is what you need. What are the assumptions? Again, asking questions. What are the assumptions that you've built into this model? Because it could be that someone didn't even really think about what assumptions that they've built in. And that can help them say, oh, you know what? There were a couple assumptions in there. Let's talk through them. This makes me frustrated. Again, talking is hard, and recognizing that, just saying, I'm frustrated and I'm frustrated because this is what I need. Again, focusing on the future. This is where I'm trying to get to. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. Asking someone about a compromise. Would you be willing to do it this way? Would you be willing to think about it in a different way? Some context that you might be missing. This is where I'm coming from. I think this may be missing in your model. I feel this way, or I feel angry. I feel, whatever it is that you're feeling, because this is my long-term goal. Again, focusing on the future helps people not get so defensive, because our drive as a human is to collaborate. I want to help you. I want to help you get to where you're going. In fact, if we're working on the same company, on the same project, on the same team, probably that's also my long-term goal. So I definitely want to help you get there. And just reminding people of that we are on the same team can really help. The reason this doesn't work for me, again, not attacking someone with this would never work, because that's not a really productive way of approaching a problem. But the reason it doesn't work for me is because, I can't work during those hours, or, I don't have that program on my computer. You can't deliver the file that way. It doesn't work for me because is a very, very, very important word in conflict. It helps build context. So even just saying this is the reason that doesn't work for me, because that can really help build the other person's context as well. And again, we're human, we're not machines. Not everything is binary, yes, no, all or nothing. This is not almost never in work is anything a zero-sum game. And so really exploring with another person when you're feeling a lot of conflict is, it feels like we're at an impasse, but is there a third or an other option that we haven't talked about? It doesn't have to be binary. We can think like humans because we are humans. We can be creative. Words and things to avoid, any universal assessments. These kinds of words put people into that defensiveness cycle. So you never do this. You always do this. Everyone is doing this. No one is doing this. Again, those universal assessments, no one's 100% right. No one is 100% wrong. Probably nothing is never happening or always happening. There's always gray area, and you just want to pay attention to those words because that triggers people to go into that defensive model. Try not to be condescending. It seems like an easy thing to say, but every time you say, actually, in reality, it's not reality, it's your reality, it's your perspective. And that, again, puts people back into that defensiveness cycle, and you don't want to perpetuate that. We want to de-escalate conflict and increase collaboration. Blaming and shaming. Again, this is not a tool that is helpful for collaboration. If only you had done this instead. Even if only we knew that at the time. There's a better way of saying that, next time, this is the lesson I learned here. I've built my context. I've learned some lessons here. And next time when we do this, I might do this differently. You misunderstood is a very accusatory way of saying that. Again, we always want to build context, ask questions rather than make demands. You're wrong, it's your fault. Those are not helpful in building collaboration. So what does a healthy communication pattern look like? There's a lot going on here, and I'll just read the whole thing so you can hear what a healthy communication pattern might sound like. This is based, if any of you have studied nonviolent communication, this is based on that model with some extra changing perspectives magic on top. But I felt frustrated when you signed off on a May delivery date and then emailed the sales team that it was going to be February. This caused confusion, clients received conflicting information, and we lost credibility. In order to continue renewing client contracts, that's my responsibility, I'm communicating, building their context. In order to continue renewing client contracts, my team needs clients to trust us. I understand that you're feeling pressure to deliver on features, ahead of schedule. Are you willing to jointly agree on dates and then stand firm with the board when they inevitably push back? There's a lot going on there, but there's a couple key points. This kind of brings together everything that we've been talking about. It's very specific, it's very explicit. There's a concrete example. It's not an assessment. You're not accusing someone of anything. You're saying this happened. There's a measurable impact. We lost trust with our clients. There's a future orientation there. You are telling someone, this is the context. I am trying to renew client contracts. This is my goal. You invite someone to say, well, that's not my goal. My goal maybe is contradictory. How can we work those together? You're giving that person empathy. I understand that you are being pushed in this area. And it also gives them the opportunity to say, well, actually, that's not even the reason I did it. I was just going off our emotional debt and I wanted to screw you over, and have that conversation. There's a collaborative solution, and then it's expectation setting. And that's key at the end. When you say the board is going to push back, I know this, you're again, like painting that future picture, and setting expectations in a really clear way. All of that is really helpful, again, to simmer down conflict and increase collaboration. So the keys to success. We have about 15 minutes for questions, but before we go to questions, just to recap what we've talked about today, these are your keys to success. If you are are in a conflict scenario, whether it's explosive right now or it's kind of just this low hum that's been eating at you and your team, recognize the emotional debt. Just recognize it and then refocus and start to think about, okay, how can I break some of those cycles that are contributing continuously to this debt? I can never dig my way out because I'm constantly adding to it. How can we refocus that? When you are uncertain and you feel your lawyer self coming out, I need to prove something, talk about that. Talk about it, reflect with yourself and talk about that and normalize saying, I'm not sure how we're going to do this. I have no idea where to begin building a nuclear power plant. But I want to talk about that because that's where we need to be spending our time, not arguing over what the project name is going to be or where the bike shed is going to be. And constantly build context. Ask questions. Build your own context. Help your teams build their context. Because again, like we said at the very beginning, almost all conflict, 99% of it, is just at its core a misunderstanding. And it usually is that context is missing. I firmly believe, and we at Changing Perspectives firmly believe, that every individual is a bright, unique, thinking, valuable, productive human. No one is an idiot. And so when you find yourself in conflict, it's not because someone is stupid, it's because something is missing or something has been miscommunicated. And the only way out of that is to constantly build context, constantly see from other perspectives. So that's how you should de-escalate and reduce conflict on your team. Take those 3 things away. And then I will open it up for questions. And if we don't have any, then we will hopefully see you next time in 2 weeks when we talk about some common collaboration barriers. So does anyone have any questions or thoughts, concerns? I don't see any on the question board. Well, good. And then I hope that was all very clear. I'm curious if you have any resources for how we might practice these dialogues. Yes, absolutely. We in Changing Perspectives have a whole bunch of worksheets and activities that can help you practice. And if you just email us on ChangingPerspectives.How, you can reach out to us and we can happily send you some of those activities. And there's a question for anyone else in the room, if there's specific conflicts that you're dealing with. If anyone has any specifics that they would like to share, we'd love to hear what you're dealing with. Well, Christina, I don't think anyone wants to share. Rigid power structure between my boss and I. Yes, that is a big one. We actually have a whole section on power and hierarchy that we talk about a lot in communication. There are lots of, if you look in the new work literature, the future of work, a lot of people predict is going to be more flat organizations. If you've heard of holacracy, there's circle organizations. But yes, hierarchy is definitely where we've come from. That is a leftover from the industrial era. And we are dealing with that. Even now we are in a knowledge worker age. We don't need to have such strict hierarchies, but we do, and it is a leftover. And we talk a lot in Changing Perspectives in our workshops about how do you kind of undo some of those structures. So feel free to reach out to us for that as well. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Oh, I see one more question. Suggestion for dealing with conflict with someone who is your supervisor. Yes, it can be delicate. So not only maybe is there a lot of emotional debt, but there's also that power dynamic. the advice really is the same. It always is to build context, because bosses especially deal with that uncertainty a lot. When you are managing a team and you have a lot of responsibilities, but you're not 100% sure always what to do, you are very easily triggered into that defensiveness. Almost everything comes as an attack. And so then it's even more really, really important to make sure that you're asking questions and not coming off in an attack mode, because managers, and the higher up you go, the more intense it gets. CEOs are definitely the worst at this. Everything kind of feels like an attack, because you are often being critiqued and attacked a lot when you're in those leadership positions. And so as someone who's working on a team, it's really important not to trigger that, because it's going to be much more productive if you come at it from, I'm just trying to understand. Tell me what your thought process is here. Great. Employees are coming forward to share experiences of racism. Yes. Again, we talk about the 3 levels of conflict and of context that people are bringing. That systemic one is a huge one. And we have to constantly think that, this isn't just about a person, it's also about a situation and a system. And racism in the workplace and implicit bias are huge issues that we are going to have a global conversation about, and will naturally cause a lot of conflict, again, because it can often feel like an attack. So as we have conversations, try to, as to the best of your ability, not get triggered into that defensive cycle, but always be asking questions and be working, again, to fold new perspectives into your own reality. Build your own context so that it's wider and broader. And the more that we can do that and encourage other people to do that, the more we will be able to have conversations that move things forward quickly, rather than getting stuck in that swirl of conflict, because it is just not productive to be constantly fighting and building friction. Again, you pay taxes on that emotional debt. And we have to think about those 3 levels. Excellent. Thank you all so much for joining. You can always come back to this same link and review and watch it again if you want to review the slides. If you would like a copy of the slides, again, just reach out to me and I'm happy to share them. And if your team has a lot of conflict that you are dealing with, we also, of course, offer workshops for teams. That is what we do. And so please reach out to us if this was helpful. Share this with your friends, share it with your teams, and reach out with any ongoing questions. I'm always here to discuss these things. Great. Well, then we will hopefully see you in 2 weeks to talk about cooperation barriers. Bye, everybody.